Good morning, everyone. Today is another episode of Arks Trash, which is a podcast. However, this time it is not audio only. There is some New Genesis footage in the background. There's actually over an hour of footage, so it took me quite some time to gather all the footage together as well as edit. So if you guys could do me a big favor, today's video is sponsored. This is actually my first sponsor. It is BenQ. So you guys may or may not have heard of BenQ. They make some really nice monitors, and they have sent me a product to review. So that will be at the very beginning of today's episode. It's going to be short and sweet. It's like under 5 minutes. So please enjoy the little 5-minute skit of me unboxing as well as giving my first impressions on this product, because it is actually a very useful product which has helped me quite a bit in my workflow, especially editing. So enjoy that part first and then enjoy the rest of the podcast. Okay? Anyway, without further ado, a word from our sponsor. This is the first proper sponsor on my channel, and it is actually from BenQ. I am a big fan of BenQ because of their gaming monitors. They have some really good gaming monitors, especially if you play a lot of FPS games. Well, BenQ reached out to me and was like, would you like to review our ScreenBar e-reading lamp? That was quite the mouthful, but basically what this does, if we switch cameras over here, so what this thing does is it's literally gonna hook right on top of my monitor where this light is, and it's gonna make my workstation a lot brighter. So this is my gaming computer, right? And so I do all my gaming here, and then on this side over here is my recording computer. But after I record everything, I actually pull up my laptop over here, which is my MacBook Pro, and then I take all the footage, I port it over to this laptop, and I edit everything on this laptop. So the issue here is sometimes I need to put in long hours. Actually, like almost for like the past 3 weeks, I haven't had a day off. I've literally been working my butt off like 18 hours a day or something crazy, because I've just got so much stuff to edit, right? And so, I'm up till, 1, 2, 3 in the morning editing. And obviously, I'm not going to keep this bright light on the entire time because it's freaking blinding me. And so what this is going to do is it's basically going to hook on top of there, shoot light downwards, so that my keyboard and my editing rig and all that has light, but it doesn't shoot laser beam lights directly into my eye. And that's what we're going to be doing now. So first of all, we're just going to be opening the box. I've already sort of pre-opened it before because it required a knife, and I only have a knife in the kitchen. And so there's this little protective thingy. We're just going to rip that off. Whoop. There is Japanese instruction manuals, which I don't care. And we are greeted with this. This is actually really nice. I think you can see it from this camera better. But it basically has instructions telling me, like, this is a mount. Wow, I wouldn't have known if I didn't. Holy crap. This is so heavy. This is really hefty. Holy crap. And then all you need to do is plug this directly into your PC. And that's it. Easy peasy. And hook this onto your screen. So I'll move my iPhone so that you can see me struggling doing that. And you can see my horrible cable management. And so we're back. So now this camera is gonna go away for a second because I need to clip this onto the back of my monitor now, right? So you're gonna need to reposition light to like there. Actually, you should reposition here, right? And then you are gonna come here. Gigantic reading light. Oh, that's good. That's a nice hefty weight. Like, it locks in perfectly. Super secure. Nice. Okay. And then this needs to plug in somewhere. We need to find a USB outlet. Do I have a USB outlet on the gaming computer? Let me take a look. I plugged it in. And do I just press on? Oh my gosh. That is beautiful. That is really nice. So for those, you guys can see really clearly. Look how bright this is. Let's toggle this a little bit more upwards. Exactly. So you see, now when I'm editing, I have light and I can actually see and everything's nice. And I think there's extra features here. I can change like the warmth. So now it's like, I don't know what type of light this is, but this is like reading light. This is the level that I usually use. What are these other buttons for? For instructional video, please scan the QR code. All right, you guys have a really weird angle. You see like the entire shaft of my microphone or my boom arm. I don't like that. So let me reposition you. There we go. Now you get a more intimate look with me or of me, and you also get to see Teresa over there, as well as Toast and my body pillows. But yeah, let me scan this QR code and see what those buttons actually do. So as you can see over here, there's a whole bunch of different buttons, right? So obviously this one is brightness. This one is temperature, like the warmth color, or yeah, they call it temperature, but it's the warmth. So for example, if I tap that, I can change it. Now you can see it's like a bluish light now. I touch it again, and it's warm now. It can turn yellowish, and so forth and so on. So I can change the temperature. But the most important one for stupid people like myself is this button right here. This automatically detects your surrounding light. So it has a sensor like right there. If my stupid phone will autofocus, right here, that is a sensor that will actually sense the ambient room color and adjust towards that, right? So this is super duper useful that I could just tap this, not think about it, and I'm good to go. You know, it's perfect for dum-dums like me. And I really like that feature. But yeah, thank you again, BenQ, for sponsoring this video and giving me this review unit to actually keep. Because this has definitely made my life a lot better. Because now I can edit here without fear of damaging my eyes. Even though my eyes are probably beyond saving anyway. I had to get new glasses recently because of that. But thank you. Anyway, that's enough of the sponsor talk. Back to the video. Welcome everyone to the 11th episode of Arks Trash. Today with me I have Kaoiji as well as Krono Katastrophy. Kaoiji, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Kaoiji, also known as Mark on Twitch. I do things, I guess.
Okay, perfect. moving on to Krono. Krono, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I'm Krono. Well, Krono Katastrophy. Usually go by Krono over on Twitch and YouTube, as well as over on Twitter as Kronos. And I also do stuff, usually with a sword in each hand.
All right. So for the audience which doesn't get anything and is the first time coming here, we are all PSO2 content creators, and today's subject is going to be about the New Genesis Closed Beta Test 2, because we were all fortunate enough to get access to the game. And so we're mainly just going to be discussing what we like, what we didn't like. So I'm going to open up the floor with our opening question over here, and that is, what is your favorite activity in New Genesis? Again, we'll start with Kaoiji.
So I feel like I don't really have an answer to that question yet, because like a lot of what we got on the beta was urgence, leveling, you know, the cocoon system. I mean, a lot of that is I guess it's okay. Like I really enjoy all of it, really. I think my favorite portion, if I had to choose out of any of the things that we've seen so far, is in fact the tower, more specifically to the cocoons, because it just felt like it was a more complete experience, as opposed to like cocoons are more like these are some tutorial type things. And I don't know, I just like that a lot more, to be honest. I'm hoping that they do towers more often than just cocoons in the actual game.
Okay, fair enough. What about you, Krono?
So as most who know me know, I'm a big combat person, so I had a lot of time had a lot of fun just bossing in general. When things went well, it was awesome, and then when things went horrible, it was hilarious. So it's the most fun I had in the beta, at least.
So out of all the content creators, I would say that both of you guys grinded pretty hard. Both of you guys played the game for, 30 plus hours. It's pretty insane. Did the grinding or the leveling up process ever get monotonous for you guys?
Actually, I really don't think it did at all. I was going around. I was like, yeah, it's fine. I feel like for a lot of like the average player, I would say it would be incredibly monotonous, because they'd be like, oh, well, after I hit a certain point, if I either log in, do my dailies, my story quests, but once I run out of those, depending on the level cap, it really just comes down to your classic JRPG mob grind. And for a lot of people, that's just boring. And I get it. Don't get me wrong. I completely understand it. This is the way that I see it when it comes to New Genesis, though, is that you're going to be doing that anyway, regardless of whether or not you're actually farming for experience or you're farming for loot or even capsules, because now there's a lot more emphasis on farming random enemies for capsules, at the very least, for your affixes and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
The grinding process did feel like, or leveling felt a little monotonous, only because of what we had access to in the beta. So people who watch beta footage or who watch the streams and things like that, one thing to keep in mind was that we only had access to, I think, a level 5 combat area and level 10 exploration areas, where combat areas were kind of designed more, they were set to 8-man, they were designed more for like just general combat. Drops tend to be a bit better in that area itself versus exploration areas, which were set up to 32 people, though great to grind in at higher levels. Didn't get as much experience in, so it did feel a bit monotonous, but I feel like that's not really a good representation of what the game will be like on full launch. Of course, we'll have access to more things, but I can say that it, after level 10 or so, it was worth it jumping in that call talk with everyone, because we just kind of mindlessly farmed enemies. But a lot of what Mark said does make a lot of sense. We will be doing that anyway in the future. It's just going to be the variety of things we'll have to grind is what's going to make it worth, and what the drops actually are, if the grind is worth it at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Because I see myself as the filthy casual in the group, and you guys are more of the hardcore min-maxer type of players. And so for me, after the initial burst in leveling, like we got to level 10 really quickly from just like the quests and stuff. And then after level 10, I got to around level 12. And then I was just like, man, I'm kind of bored of grinding the swamp area. And I was just like, what else is there to do? So instead, I just started exploring and finding side quests and other things to do. I'm not really that big of a fan of just grinding. But then the more I thought about it, it kind of is the same in vanilla PSO2. Because what we do now, or what we did back in like episode 3, was we just grind advanced quests. And then what we do now is we just grind bonus keys. So it's technically still the same. It's still grinding, doing the same activity over and over, except now we're in an open field or an open world, which is a nice change in scenery, especially with the different targets, as well as like the interactiveness of the map and random things happening. What are your thoughts about that, Kaoiji?
We're talking about trials, right?
Yeah.
I love trials and PSO2 New Genesis, as opposed to the way that they work in base PSO2 more specifically. But the way that I guess I really had a problem with them is that, especially in the level 10, level 15 zone, you have 32 players, and it feels like they go by way too quickly in a lot of cases. So if you're on one side of the map, you don't get the opportunity to actually get there, because everyone's already on the point and it's completed by the time you want to meeting up with the rest of the group. And that to me is a little bit of a problem. So I feel like the way that trials should be balanced should be more catered to the 32-man zone, to where either enemy density is higher, so that way more people can be able to participate, or whenever you had the large ship ones, where like the ships would come in, they'd start beaming down, like shooting down, spawning in enemies. I feel like these ships themselves should have more health, because by the time what's happening, they're already dead. I feel like that's a problem that early Destiny had, I want to say, and even early Final Fantasy 14, where like you'd go in, there are fates or even public events, and they'd be completed way before you even got the chance to participate, and you'd be like, what the hell just happened? And that needs to at least be something that you're addressed in New Genesis before the official launch, because I love them. They just need a little bit of work.
Actually, going to build on that as well. I am someone who currently plays Final Fantasy 14. I raid in 14 pretty consistently. That was the first thing I thought of when I was going through the trial system, was that these are basically just fates from Final Fantasy 14. One thing that did end up being a difference that I know 14 came across eventually was proper scaling for them. Essentially, as more players got closer to the actual trial itself, the health of the enemies would scale appropriately to the number of players that were close by, or that were, basically taking part in the trial. Or I say trial, but it was the fate basically back then. And I feel like that could be something that's looked at to be a bit better overall, because I don't feel like it scales properly just yet. Again, beta, so we'll have to see how it scales in full game. But that was kind of an issue that I saw, that it was kind of a little polarizing. Boss enemies tend to have, or seem like they had a decent amount of HP. For when you would fight them, you tend to get to them pretty quickly. But like when we had trials that were just tons of enemies that were spawned, they would get wiped out in seconds. So either kind of what Mark mentioned, where there needs to be either more enemies or just higher health pools scaling properly to number of players. But we'll have to see how that works out.
So out of the 2 regions, there was one region which was mainly for 8-man, and there was like a lot of PSE bursts going on. And then there was a 32-man, the open exploration field, where there was just a lot of different trials. Which one fits your playstyle the most? Which one did you enjoy more?
For me personally, I actually really felt like I enjoyed the 8-man a little bit more, because I felt like extermination zones fit the idea in my head where I was talking about enemy density. I feel like that's one of the things that they were discussing anyway, and like in the Prologue 2 stream, is that they were saying that the extermination zones or the 8-man zones are meant to have that higher enemy density. So that way when players go there, you know, those are where you're going to be grinding. Those are where you're going to get a lot of the loot. Whereas exploration zones, those are what you're going to be doing, you know, during the story, when you're farming for capsules, and when you're farming for you know, particular enemies with a large group, like the Dread Keepers or the Gigantics. So keeping that in mind, I felt like the 8-man zones were just, you know, a better for me, just as a player. It kept my smooth brain, you know, pretty smooth.
And Krono?
I kind of am in the same boat. I'm more of a fan of the 8-man groups, or the 8-man the 8-man exploration, or not explorations, but the eradication zones, or just the fighting zones, battle zones in general. Just because me like to smash things. But I like fighting stuff. Like that's what keeps me playing PSO2 in general, like the general combat and the feel. I like 8-man zones primarily because one, since I play in melee combat, one big issue for me in the exploration zones were just the sheer number of people. So many animations going on top of a target made it very difficult for me to feel like I was like intentionally fighting the boss consistently. Like there'll be moments where I have threat and everything's great and I can, you know, actively fight against the boss, but because so many animations are going on, I would miss, you know, key features and key things that the boss was doing, where I felt like I was just spamming, which wasn't as fun. But in those 8-man zones, it feels more like a freeform dungeon almost, in a sense, where you're not bound to have a specific party, but going in, people just kind of coming in, going out, or whatever. But it was a much more focused area on combat, where you could kind of have those sort of interactions and those sort of fights where you felt like you were a bit more control, especially from melee perspective. Because I will tell you one thing is, playing melee in the beta, if you weren't prepared for what the enemy was going to do, you're going to get bopped fast and hard.
Mm-hmm. So I do want to jump into the whole topic of combat, but before we do that, I have to ask both of you guys, what do you think of the new PSE system? We'll start with Kaoiji here.
Actually, you know, Krono, you could start this one.
Okay,
I feel
sure.
like I've started
Krono, you can start.
You know, something told me you were going to do that at some point. But PSE, I mean, I think it's better from a sense of it being more simplified. One thing I noticed that happened a lot when PSO2 came out to the West, because there wasn't a lot of information about how PSE worked from base game. There were a lot of things that were just kind of made up. People had all these thoughts about, you know, stacking photon blast and so on and so forth. But the PSE feels like very straightforward, has like an overall goal. It is a little bit simplistic, but there's like kind of an essence to that simplicity. I think it's actually, you know, it's definitely better. I think it can be worked on a little bit more to be like a little bit more interesting, but it's definitely it's a step in the right direction, at least.
Yeah, and so I remember, you know, PSE being a huge conversation when Global came out. And I even made a video on it. I was like, this is exactly what it is. I debunked 90% of the information in my video, but it still had people argue with me saying, no, but I read in this Reddit post from 2015 that this was entirely true. It's like, no, in that same Reddit thread, they say none of this is true. Why are you making a Reddit? But anyway, let me digress.
Random point. I remember literally finding your video and pointing people to watch this. This is exactly what I'm talking about, by the way. Like, here you go. There's someone making a video that makes sense about this. Like, I just blew my mind. But yeah, go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. And so it was really early for me. Like, I didn't actually think I was gonna even continue making YouTube, because around that time I was like, you know what? Let me just put out some videos here and there. And life hit. But anyway, so PSE Burst and New Genesis just feels like a much better system. The only problem that I have with it is that it's a little bit more seemingly random than in base PSO2. And the reason I say that is because like you don't actually see a lot of the time where like you can see where the zones are. They're marked by an E that's on the map to signify PSE Burst zone. But the rate in which the gauge will increase or decrease literally just, it's like, hey, I want to decrease all of a sudden. And you're like, okay, why? And then you go to the PSE zone and then it increases, but you don't get the PSE burst. You can literally go from 1 to PSE burst without any indications as to what caused that. There's no like enemies glowing like it was in base PSO2 or anything of the sort. So it becomes a little bit more jarring in a sense, but because it happens way more frequently, I think that it wasn't even like that big of a deal. Like anybody who's going to start coming in and they want to farm PSE burst, you're gonna get one. It's guaranteed, unlike in PSO2 base where it's kind of like the only guaranteed place to get one is advanced quests realistically. Any other place you're kind of screwed because you might never see one.
Yeah, it did feel a lot like run to that spot, hit the enemies, eventually it's just gonna work out.
Yeah,
exactly. Like I'm sure there might have been some text explaining how PSE bursts, but since everything was in Japanese, I just clicked next on everything. But
basically, yeah.
The thing was, like, when I went in, I had no idea what filled up the gauge and what decreased the gauge, as you were saying, Kaoiji. But, like, I basically just ran in. I was just like, I'm just going to kill everything as fast as possible. That was my logic. But the thing that I really liked about the PSE burst compared to vanilla is with vanilla PSO2, when you hit a PSE burst, monsters just start spawning around random players or all players. But with this PSE burst in New Genesis, you literally see this rainbow beam go up into the sky and you get this like E symbol that's all rainbow colored and all the mobs spawn in that area. So it's a lot more concentrated. And I really like that because it felt like, oh, there's where all the action is. And you go there and it's really high paced action.
Yeah, and I like that too because it was something that was indicated like on the map. Everyone knew where to go. Like to be able to start the PSE burst or at least to be able to farm the enemies. And I think that was something that base PSO2 needed. A lot of the issue that I personally find is a lot of players they'll go into an advanced quest or an exploration zone or something like that where they need to farm for PSE bursts. And then you'll have players scattered throughout the map. And that's not fun when you're trying to concentrate everything into one area. The other bonus part about it is that the way that it worked also in New Genesis was that it didn't really matter where you were because yes, everything is spawned in one central location, but the amount of enemies doesn't change depending on where you are at the location. Like if let's say you're on the other side of that extermination zone, all the enemies are still going to spawn in that one spot. And that enemy density doesn't change regardless. So that just felt better overall.
That was a big part of it. You weren't really working around, because that's something that you tend to do when you learn about PSE bursting, is a method that we used a lot over on the Japanese servers called exit bursting or corner bursting. Essentially, you start up the possibility of getting a PSE burst and you get everyone to one centralized location where spawns could only happen in a smaller area to keep enemies kind of tightly packed. And then you would, of course, just mow the enemies down as PSE burst would go off. That level of of optimization can be cool, but not having to have that be a consistent thing makes for the entire process being substantially less annoying, which I thought was kind of fun. Was always a lot more fun for me personally. Just being able to jump into it, not having to teach everyone all of the specifics of exit and corner bursting and all this other stuff.
Another thing that I really liked about the new system was how easy it was to just drop in and play. Like, you just went through that loading screen, or like it's not even a loading screen, right? You just literally walk into the zone and you're automatically in a random party of 8 people, or how many people that are in that instance that you're in. And it's really nice for solo players. That's how I feel, because you literally just run in and then the game automatically throws you into a party and you guys do whatever you want to do. And then when you're done with it, you can just drop out and it'll autofill someone else that runs back in. So it's really good for solo play. Like SEGA really catered towards a lot of the solo players, because when we look at PSO2 vanilla right now, like let's say that you want to do, Buster Quest or something. You literally open up your room and you just pray to RNG that someone actually finds your game and joins it. But the chances of that are pretty low because the player needs to know how to find the game and how to join the game. But in this case, everything's automatic and everything is seamless.
For sure.
No, and absolutely, I agree.
So we're going to transition over to our favorite topic now, and that's going to be combat. But before we do that, I want the audience to know what classes you guys mained first. Again, we'll start with Krono this time.
I played fighter mostly and a bit of hunter.
I played gunner and then I also played hunter.
Perfect. So I personally played hunter, and then I had a little bit of gunner because of my drops. I got a 3-star TMG, which is why I dabbled in gunner. But let's talk about combat. Let's start off with Krono with the fighter.
So, and I wanted to mention this earlier, but I totally forgot to. Keep in mind, I don't know about you guys, but I can't read Japanese, so there may have been some stuff that they told us in game that we just couldn't tell. So be easy on us. We apologize if we missed something. There's probably like something very glaring. Let's say, hey, look, this is how you do this one thing that we all missed. I can't read it. I'm sure that I'm not. I think Mark, you're the only one of us that can actually read some Japanese. Is that right?
I read a little. I was able to read enough to be able to get by, but when it was like too, kanji dense, I was like, there's so much here. Help.
yeah. So just as as a disclaimer of the sense, but so fighter, where do I even start? I completely missed the question on that one. What?
Yeah. So what do you think about the fighter combat style? I remember you made a video saying that combat is slower. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
So fighter was probably the one class that felt the closest to current PSO2 in a sense. It had a lot of what I called non-committing moves, like you weren't stuck doing a bunch of things. I know there was a big point or a lot of people had some issues with a lot of different PAs and different attacks not being able to be canceled out of, or a lack of animation canceling. Fighter felt like it had the least amount of that. There was like one move where you did a whole bunch of like punches or whatever, and then just an uppercut at the end. The only part that you were really stuck into was as soon as you started the uppercut, you couldn't cancel out of that. But what I mentioned in that video was that combat felt better paced overall. When I say better paced, I mean like in current PSO2, there are some fights for certain classes where you feel like the enemy is just running circles around you. Like you can't keep up with what they're doing, what's going on. I'm thinking of situations like Ranger trying to deal with a fight like Masquerade, where I think the only clear of like level 9 or of depth 999 of Masquerade for Ranger at the moment is like with Sub Hunter, and they procced their Iron Will like 7 times. So like it was absolutely insane. Where like currently in PSO2 or in NGS, now granted, of course, this could change as time goes on. It's very early on in the game itself. And the classes felt like it was drastic. Like you didn't feel like you were drastically outpaced by an enemy, at least from what I could see of the gameplay that I watched and saw. I know some people have some issues with like Tekker, and I believe Force is a little slow for some people, or just maybe a little boring. I'm not 100% sure, but like as far as gameplay went, like when things went well on Fighter, things went really well. Like there were some moments where we were fighting, I think it's like Bushin, or we all call him Sasuke, basically in the swamp, one-armed dude with a sword. But like he has a move where he summons that dome around him and then does a bunch of slashes inside of it. Like being able to parry every single one of those attacks and not be stopped the entire way through felt amazing. And there was also the opposite side of that, where there were so many people stacked on top of you all at once and you couldn't see what was happening. And he starts that move and you're completely just blown away. So it was a lot of fun. I will say at the moment, it did feel a little bit unfair from a melee perspective compared to range, just because like being in the thick of things, you would see situations of like ranged players being kind of behind you and then having access to even better weak spots than you could, while dealing with the fact that you were kind of, I mean, at least in the beta, we were kind of grounded a little bit more. Knuckles were a little bit more grounded than Sword was, of course. But you had to deal with, of course, elevation as well as being right on top of the enemy.
What about you, Kaoiji, for the gunner?
I mean, yeah, I kind of agree with a lot of that for the most part, because when I went to go play ranged, I felt like ranged was a lot easier of a time for me. I think the only difference was that range in PS2 New Genesis, this is definitely a hell of a lot more squishy. Like we're talking almost a 100 HP difference. When I put my units that were on gunner onto my hunter, I was like, oh, that's quite a bit of difference realistically. And HP is weighed a lot heavier in New Genesis than it is in base PS2, and I'm sure that's gonna hopefully remain the same throughout the game's lifespan. And it's not just for the early game. But whenever I went to go play hunter, I was like, wait a minute, if I'm not parrying shit, like I'm making a mistake, and then even if I missed it, sure I was able to live it, but like then I would be out of range of the enemy a lot of the time, and it would be like, you know, using Sasuke bot as the perfect example. If I didn't parry any of his hits, I'm taking far more time trying to track him more than anything. I'm like, all right, where are you? Where did you go? Can I run to you real quick, or do I have to wait for your next hit? You know, and that's probably one of the more frustrating things about melee combat in New Genesis, as opposed to the way that it works in base BSO2, because in base BSO2, it's kind of almost the reverse, where range is a little bit of an issue and melee is a little bit better. But I'm sure that'll, you know, that's just where the game is currently, and it's certain enemies will work better with range, certain enemies will work better with melee. We've only seen most boss enemies kind of work with one way, but I will say that I guess the fact that range is a lot more squishy does at least lend itself to being a somewhat balanced experience, even though range is a lot more easy mode than melee.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the main thing that was really eye-opening for me was the change in elevation. A lot of boss fights in particular had a lot more elevation, and so you had to adjust your playstyle, especially if you're melee, because in base PSO2 right now, we have a lot of gap closers. So, you know, if I'm a braver, I just activate katana combat, lock onto the weak spot, hold down left click, I'm done, right? I just fly up there and I have the elevation. But in New Genesis, when I was playing the hunter class, in order to reach up, for example, let's talk about the urgent quest, right? That big Goliath, or well, I don't even know what his name is, but the big dude, like he has a weak spot, like sometimes his wings is his weak spot. So you have to like photon dash, double jump, glide over just to reach his wings, or you can use the booster pads. But it made the experience a lot more active. You felt really in the fight all the time. While if you were a range class, you had that trade-off of, oh wow, that boss can literally two-shot me with that laser beam, so I need to dodge all these lasers, but I do get the quality of life of I can stay down here, I can either, you know, stay on the ground and shoot the wings, or I can jump, and as a gunner, you can do the aerial type of movement, which is also pretty cool. So what do you guys think about that urgent quest?
I tanked it far too often for my liking as a gunner,
I tried.
No, there was another time where we actually got stuck in a 3-man, and I was taking a majority of that too. And it's a fun urgent, but again, if you're ranged, I think the only problem I have is with gunner dodge for the most part when it comes to a lot of those bigger enemies is that even if I dodge, I still get hit. And I'm not sure if it was just latency on, you know, from playing on the Japanese servers. It didn't feel like latency at all. It just felt like I dodged it initially, and then I'd get hit by, you know, the retracting hitbox. And I was like, I don't like this. But ultimately, I really liked the way that the urgent felt. I was actually going back and talking about it with people on my Discord, and it feels like, because we were talking lore, it feels like a lot of the way that the enemies are working is like, if you're familiar with the Dark Falls, is like Dark Falls Angel and, you know, Varuna and all these different enemies, you'll basically have a really easy time with the early game of NGS, because that's just where it feels like they drew their inspiration from, like immediately. The urgent quest felt like you were fighting, you know, when I finally made it click, it felt like you were fighting Dark Falls Angel, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I think it's the lasers, as Krono said. It's because of those freaking lasers. I was like, yeah, that's Angel.
Fusion in the swamp. I'm sorry, that's just Varuna, dude. Like you just replace,
man.
You replace swing and a miss with just a purple sheen, and then it's it. You've got the same character. But no,
swing and a miss.
Exactly. But the urgent quest is actually pretty fun. And a lot of what you mentioned of fighting that target did feel like it. When I mentioned, like, you know, I was doing my best. Like, so we had the one time I got to the urgent quest, unfortunately parties were broken, so we did a 4-man. We completed it, which was a lot of fun actually. So, you know, low manning still seems to be pretty fun even in NGS. But when I mentioned, like, you know, trying my best, it felt like I was really putting everything in, like jumping up to get to the right spots, consistently parrying everything the boss does, because if I didn't, he would literally 1 or 2 shot me. It was insane. It was a lot of fun, and the moments that like you could really tell when you had threat versus not having threat, and that was something like in other classes in a PSO2 base game right now, like that doesn't matter as much. I mean, granted, you know, some classes in base game really want to have threat of the boss itself, but like in NGS, like I almost shied away from having threat in some cases because it almost felt like I didn't have a like room to breathe. Like I would have to be on top, like you have to be on your toes every step of the way. And that was really fun. I actually enjoyed that quite a bit, but it also helped me understand that I wish there were a couple things that were changed. Like one thing that was a little difficult was maintaining that aerial combat. And I do mention that a lot, just for, I mean, for clarity's sake, we only had access to one weapon type for the classes. I'm sure when we have other weapons, like for example, when fighters have something like twin daggers, and when other classes of other weapons that are, you know, a bit better in the aerial combat, you'll be able to swap over to something that's better for those situations and it won't be as bad. But like, this is just kind of what we had access to. And it made me think like the situations where like, oh, I'd be really awesome if I could photon dash and then double jump and then bounce off of the enemy. Cause like he's, you know, a target right there. If I could just jump off of him to get to another weak spot, that would be super cool. Other than that, you really had to kind of pay attention to everything you were doing around you. And you had to be responsible for yourself was a big thing too. Like healing is instant, but it doesn't heal for as much as you think. You can run out, we learned.
Yeah, it's one third of your health bar. And as awesome as that sounds immediately, it goes by really quickly. Playing as a ranged in NGS whenever you have aggro is definitely a lot more detrimental than playing as a melee. I'll tell you that.
With the gunner, you had a very specific attack that would animation lock you the moment you clicked it, right? I think it looked like Starfire Squall from the hero, but I don't exactly know what the full name was.
I forget what the name was, but we have a PA that's basically a two-step. If we press it, it automatically fires. It's like it just shoots. And then if we press it again, then it does an animation lock to where you fire one big shot and your character, you know, leaps backwards. And I'm not sure if that has any iframes. I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel like any because every time I got hit, I was always in that, and that sucked. And I think that's the one thing. One of the reasons why I played Gunner was because I felt like Gunner was going to have a much more interesting indication of how that's going to be playing in the base game. Because realistically, the way that Gunners work as of right now is they only have one gun, one weapon, and that's TMGs, and that doesn't change in New Genesis. They can use rifles, that's nice, but realistically, they only have TMGs. That's just the long and short of it. So I felt like if Gunner didn't have the ease of access that I was looking for, then most of the other classes weren't going to have that either, regardless of how many weapons they had. Luckily enough, it does. It's just animation locking doesn't seem as intuitive in NGS as opposed to in base PS2, where I feel like in a lot of cases, I can cancel out of most animations in base PS2, whereas in NGS, it's because combat is a lot more deliberate. It's like, all right, well, if I'm animation locked, I'm a little bit more, I'm screwed, realistically. Again, that's not a bad thing in any sort of way. I don't think that's a negative point to NGS. It's just something that you gotta get used to.
For sure. I feel like the combat system in NGS is a lot more quote unquote simple, because it's like, oh, you press this button once and then you do like a whole chain of combos. But the timing on when you cast certain PAs is very important. I can only talk for Hunter for myself, because that's the main class that I played, and it felt very similar to when I played Sekiro. It was like, all right, so yeah, you've got these basic moves, it's great, and they're all very powerful, but certain moves take a long time to charge up, and your counter is like your bread and butter. It's like, yeah, you counter and then you immediately get to that fifth attack, which is going to deal like 400, 800 damage. It's a lot of damage, but it's very high risk, high reward, because if you fail the counter, well, you're probably dead or you're going to be bleeding out. And then there's the other part where Kaoiji mentioned earlier, you lose a lot of distance, because especially against the ninja guy or the Sasuke, like he just dashes away and you take like, oh, you have to spend 5 seconds to run after him to get close enough to hit him again, and that's a DPS loss. What about with Fighter? Was it very similar to the Hunter?
So it was in a sense, A lot of it was getting used to your options on how to deal with incoming damage, and I actually experienced this with fighter as well as with hunter. With fighter, it was the knuckle sway. One thing I learned about knuckle sway was that first off, you would sway. Yeah, you deal retaliation damage, of course. Whenever you actually got the sway and dodged an ability, you had another option. If you press sway again and you dodged another ability, you actually did another animation afterwards, which was different. And as long as you were continuously doing that while also like swaying attacks that were coming in towards you, you could chain that infinitely over and over again until finally finishing off with just a normal attack. The catch was when you go into that normal attack, you're committed to the normal attack there. You'll take damage. Even, I mean, granted, you have super armor, so you won't be knocked back, but you will, like, you keep going with the attack itself, which, I mean, you still take, you know, a considerable amount of damage. And in melee, at, you know, at the rate that we were in, you know, with our gear and things of that sort, I think I had like maybe 300 HP at most. You would get absolutely destroyed. But it was cool because I had ways of dealing with damage. You had to really think about it. You had to be really methodical. You couldn't just throw abilities out left and right. It really hit home when I swapped over to Hunter, where you have something called Photon Arts Avenger. I'm not sure how much you messed around with that, but essentially you would charge a PA, and as you let go of the PA, you had essentially almost guard frames on the PA itself, and you would also deal increased damage. So you could step through an attack and normal attack. You could block parry and then normal attack, or you could Photon Arts Avenger, depending upon where you were in your attacks itself. So it was a lot of like, when I played Hunter, I did a lot of thinking about like what I could do versus when I played Fighter, mostly it was just reaction to what was coming at me, which was cool. I had a lot of fun with, but I felt like the thought process was really fast paced, even for combat that felt a bit more methodical and a bit more slowed down.
I actually had to find like a band-aid solution. My band-aid solution was the TMG weapon action, because I had the TMG, so I did the multi-weapon system and I linked them together. And so what I did was, when I'm up in the air and I don't want to lose elevation, I was just spamming the TMG weapon action or the gunner roll in order to just stay up there, in order to reposition myself, and then continuously using my sword to deal damage. And so I feel like the multi-weapon system is kind of intuitive in that sense, but I feel like not a lot of people are going to use it immediately on day one, especially PC gamers, because we're so used to just scroll wheel up, scroll wheel down in order to switch weapon palettes. And it took me a very long time. It took me almost like 3 hours to get used to the whole multi-weapon system. What about you, Kaoiji? Did you ever try that out?
The multi-weapon system is great. Like, I just don't think it's going to be something that I'm going to do early game again, mainly because of the resource and meta cost. Anybody who wants to play it, assuming that things stay the same, they're going to need to amass a ton of resources, much like how they already do in PSO2 when it comes to like enhancing. They're going to need to do the same thing again, but more so just to be able to finance the multi-weapon system, especially if it's just for one weapon, if not multiple. I think that's my only concern with it. But like, I did Gunner and Hunter sword, and I thought it was great because if I couldn't Gunner weapon action, I could guard, and that was so much more reliable in a lot of cases. And I was like, wait, hold on, this changes the game.
What about you, Krono? Did you ever test out the system?
So I did get a chance to test out the multi-weapon system. I don't want to say like extensively, but a decent amount. And what I kind of learned about it essentially, and this might go into a little bit of what you probably are going to be planning on testing yourself, Mark. So the multi-weapon system, the way it ended up working out essentially was almost like having access to quick swapping of your weapons on the same palette without having to actually use hotkeys. So anyone who plays on PC normally, who's used to using quick swap for their weapons, if you actually didn't know, the number pad 1 through 6 will hot swap your weapons. So if you were to press 1 through 6 and you have the base, base keybinds, it'll swap through your weapons 1 through 6. It's actually how I swap through my weapons in current PSO2. What I tested over on the beta was, because of how fast the weapon swapping is, which we believe it might be client side now, because of how fast the weapon swapping actually is in game, it felt like that system, the multi-weapon system, was just that combined together. Like, it would just hot swap your weapon for you. Essentially, what I tested out was Sword Knuckles, and the way the weapon behaved was whatever weapon you had out was basically what it was doing and how it would perform. So I have my weapon action bound to a separate button. If I press weapon action neutrally, it would use the weapon action of my main weapon, which was Knuckles at the time. However, if I had an alt modifier set up, I'd press like my alt modifier. Usually, I think it's shift by default. You press shift and then you go into like your second portion of your palette. I had that set to sword normal. And if I press that, it switched to sword. And then when I press weapon action again, it would do the weapon action of the sword itself. And any of the abilities that I would do would be of that sword at the time. Now, if I took weapon action and put it on my palette specifically, it would do the weapon action of the weapon that I set it to. So it's a little bit weird to get used to at first, but essentially what it ended up working out was it basically just does that. It hot swaps your weapon for you automatically. And for me personally, I'm kind of in agreement with Mark. I'm probably not going to touch that early game at all, primarily because I don't have a need for it whatsoever other than saving palette space. That's the biggest thing is like, if I just don't want to worry about having to swap weapons consistently, basically just being lazy, I can just use the multi-weapon system in that sense. Primarily because technically, if I were just to press buttons of swapping weapons, unlike PSO2 and NGS, it happens near instantly. In PS2, there's a bit of a lag. Your character kind of resets their animation, like to regular standing animation, whenever they swap weapons. In NGS, it just happens automatically. I can just press normal 3 times, press weapon, swap, and then press normal 3 times again, and it just goes out almost in a chain. So it's very, very intuitive, very fast, but it kind of works against itself. It's just going to depend on how they move into it in towards endgame and things like that.
Yeah, like I really enjoy it, and like again, like I was talking about before earlier, it's like you multi-weapon system, like again, you know, like I did Gunner TMGs and Hunter Sword. The ease in which I was able to just swap between, like, you know, the parry rather than having to swap weapons entirely, like that was just great. It's just not good early game.
The only issue I have with it early game, especially, is simply the cost. You can't justify the amount of materials you need to mine for, as well as the Meseta cost, because the Meseta cost for just combining 2 3-star weapons together was 160,000 Meseta. We only had like 3 weeklies that gave us like 100,000 each. So, you know, it was a big substantial amount of money in order to invest into this system for just the little bit of quality of life, which we can just, you know, overcome really easily with your freaking number pad or your scroll wheel. And so it didn't justify the cost. And I feel like that was the main stopping point for me. I was just like, yeah, I'm not going to spend this much resources just for this little bit of quality of life.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Like, that's all the more reason why it's like early game, it's not even worth investing into, because sure, you know, it's not even like a little bit. It's depending on the class combination, it could be, you know, substantial. It's a substantial quality of life. And again, we'll probably see more of that in the official release with all the new weapons and whatnot. But that cost, it basically rises up 50K per rarity. And think about it, when we start getting into 4-star weapons, that's 200K per every multi-weapon. And then when you go to enhance that, you know, it's double the amount of end grinders, not Meseta cost, but end grinders. Right? Or is it Meseta cost?
It's the other way around. Yeah, it's the
on end grinders.
Yep.
Yeah. So even more, it's Meseta that goes up, and so it's like, yes, sure, there's a lot more focus in NGS. Like I had mentioned before, that one of my videos, that Meseta has a lot more use this time around, because it feels like it's a much more precious resource, and it might just again be because it's early game. That happened in base PSO2 as well. That Meseta was a very, you know, important resource in the early game. But man, is multi-weapon specifically just a very expensive habit?
I will say there's one thing to catch about multi-weapon that did come in handy, which was kind of cool. The fact that it took so you had a base weapon and the weapon you were adding it to. Through testing, because I actually had to figure this out the hard way, it would take the grinds of the base weapon, not the weapon that was adding to it. So it would take whatever you had your weapon enhanced. Say your weapon is enhanced to +30 or something like that. You had a base grind weapon. If you add that with the multi-weapon system, well, congratulations, you have a multi-weapon now that's of what that base weapon was. And it would also use the affixes of that base weapon as well. So you do save a bit with having to affix or augment multiple weapons. Granted, it costs more to grind at the end of the day, but you could also technically save that by just grinding the weapon to start with and then multi-weaponing it. So that was something that I mentioned in feedback as well. I'm not sure if that's intentional. Maybe it wasn't, and maybe it could have been something that was on launch and I might have ruined it. Sorry, not sorry. But it is something to keep an eye out for, because that is actually kind of cool. you can put together some pretty interesting combinations, and you may be able to actually cut a couple corners when it comes to augmenting or paying for upgrades. But Meseta is a very, very precious resource, at least early game.
So I want to move along to our next topic because I want to talk about performance. I want to talk about how did the game perform for your systems. Kaoiji, we'll start with you. So maybe like say what system specs are and then what settings you were able to play on.
So I have a 2080 Super and I have 32 gigabytes of RAM and I'm running an i9 9900K. I think the only performance hitch that I had at any given point was during the Urgent. And that happened at the very beginning for whatever reason. Like every time we ran the Urgent, there would be like, it was doing all the lasers, a lot of particle effects that were going on the field, and it was just heavy in certain cases, and I didn't quite understand why. And then they did the maintenance on the last day. It was like a 2-hour maintenance or whatever. And I'm not gonna lie to you, that immediately stopped. I didn't have any other issues after that. So I don't know if it's just they did like a quick optimization patch. Maybe that was server side. Like I had no issues running it on my rig other than the Urgent Quest at any given point.
And you were playing everything on maxed out, right? Max settings?
Correct. Yeah, I was running everything on max.
Okay, perfect. What about you, Krono?
So I have a very similar rig. The only difference is that I actually have a 2 PC setup. I stream from a streaming rig, and then I actually play from a different computer. So mine was all just base, you know, essentially treating my computer almost as a console. Burning a 2070 Super, an i9 9900K, and then I mean, of course, a couple extra bells and whistles, a few overclocks here and there. But the only time I really saw any sort of issues was primarily when the Urgent Quest was popping up the first 2 times. Whenever that was going on, the game did tend to chug a little bit, especially while there was like rain going on and things like that. And it was interesting because even though I wasn't in the Urgent Quest, it seemed like the concentration of players in the Urgent Quest itself tend to cause things to run a bit slower. Now, granted, it could be a force optimization being beta, so on and so forth, but things didn't run as great. Now, everything was hiked up to basically the max setting. The only thing I had turned down was I turned off motion blur and bloom by default. I don't know why. That's just me. But I personally don't like either one of those. Motion blur was a really big one. Turning that off made the game run way smoother immediately. But it really just tended to chug in those spots specifically, and I couldn't really understand what was going on there.
Gotcha.
But after the maintenance, things tend to run a bit better overall. Like it wasn't as, I would say crazy, but it wasn't as bad essentially.
Okay. Well, I'm the hobo of the group. I have a really crappy i7 7700K, a 1060, GTX 1060, and 8 gigs of RAM, right? So I'm pretty much 4 years in the past, or maybe 5 years in the past. But my PC was able to run everything on medium settings, which was like 4. It recommended 5. So for the viewers out there, the maximum settings that you could set, or the recommended settings, was 6 was the highest, 1 was the lowest. And when you launch the game for the first time, it automatically gives you a recommended one. It just looks at your system specs. And so it automatically gave me 5, which was like 1 off from the maximum settings. But I would get sort of FPS drops when I went out to more populated areas, especially at the 32-man areas, when everyone's trying to kill one of like the Sasuke guys or any of the bosses when everyone's dogpiling. So I lowered all my settings to 4, or to the recommended 4. And of course, I also turned off motion blur, because I can't play with motion blur. I get really sick when I see that. So I turned that off. And at 4, I was able to play everything at 60 FPS. But I also had the same problem as Mark, where it wasn't during the beginning. It was during his enraged phase on the Urgent Quest, when he would summon all these lasers. And especially since I was melee and I was close up, I felt like it was trying to load the lasers in like high definition or something, and it was really
that's what I was talking about. Yeah.
And that it really chugged my FPS there. I would drop from 60 frames to about like 10 for like that one animation. But once the lasers disappeared, I would jump straight back up to 60 again, which is very nice. I did limit my FPS to 60. However, I think you could play at 144, was it? I never really.
You can play uncapped actually, because that's how I was playing uncapped.
Okay, so yeah, you can play with uncapped FPS, but I limited mine to 60 since my monitor is only 60 hertz, and there's just no reason for me to play it higher. But yeah, so I feel like it's not that bad. Like, just being able to play on medium, the graphics still look beautiful. For my viewers out there, you can just watch any of my videos talking about New Genesis. That is all on graphics setting 4, and it still looks really, really nice. Now, if you guys want to check out high settings, links are in the description below. There's Krono's channel, Kaoiji's channel. Check both of them. You can see it in all its glory. So, of course, there is the million-dollar question, and that is, do you think most players that can run vanilla PSO2 right now will be able to play New Genesis? We'll start with Krono over here.
I think that if the only way you can load the game is currently at tier 1 graphics, max tier 2, you're going to run into some problems. It definitely is a step up. However, the average player with the average machine will be able to run the game well enough, I believe.
Okay. Kaoiji?
Oh yeah, like I feel like there's gonna be a lot of players that are, if they're already playing on incredibly dated graphics, then sure they might have issues, but anybody who's even on an average rig right now, they'll be able to play it just fine with minimal to low issues. There were a couple people who were playing at tier 2 graphics. You know, they got into the beta and they were letting me know that the game just ran fine, and it still looked pretty good. You know, not like fantastic, but like comparatively, but it looks like they were just playing base PSO2 IMO.
I will say it didn't, like, if you guys have looked at tier 6 graphics compared to tier 1 for PSO2, tier 6 graphics compared to tier 1 and NGS did not look as polarizing as it does for PSO2. I can tell you that right now.
Oh yeah. It's on PSO2 base, it's night and day. But in NGS, it was like, yeah, you know, this is not gonna enjoy it, but it's also, you know, you can still get some really good experiences out of it as well. It's still screenshot worthy, really. I think is a good way to describe it for most people who might be interested.
Like something I noticed when I was watching King Kazuma stream, because King Kazuma doesn't have a very powerful system like myself, but like I think he was running the game off a regular mechanical hard drive while I run it on an SSD. You can tell that the game still runs perfectly smooth. It just takes longer to load like character models and load everything, all those the details, but like it doesn't affect the gameplay itself. Like you can still go into an 32-man exploration area, but just the models, they all look like the default model at first, like the gray default model, and then it'll slowly load that in, but it doesn't impact the gameplay, or at least your gameplay, which is really, really nice. So I like how they're optimizing the system to cater to different you know, specifications and so forth and so on.
And I do know that they're gonna at least be trying to optimize a little bit better. Like they're not done with any of the optimization patches. They're still trying to fix some of the graphics updates that were going on JP. Stands to reason that it might even become way better once official release happens, and that'll be great.
So we are almost at time for today's episode of Arks Trash, but before I leave you guys, I have a hot take question for you. What in New Genesis did you enjoy the least, and what do you think SEGA needs to improve before New Genesis
audio
is
balancing
released? Sorry,
audio balancing. Not even gonna finish letting you say the audio balancing 100%. Like there is no doubt in my mind that they need to fix their audio balancing. It's a persistent issue, and base PSO2 JP currently has a situation where their audio balancing, as well as some audio issues, are completely broken on, you know, and on their side of the game currently, as at the time of recording this. You can tell that a lot of that audio balancing persisted into New Genesis. Playing Gunner, just to use as an example, the moment you pop chain trigger, that shit was not only 20 decibels higher than the rest of your game, but imagine you have your game at literally setting 10, right, for sound effects, and chain trigger is at max 250, and you're like, why is this such a thing? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Did you teleport Gunner?
It's definitely an issue, I would say, for sure. And it's something that does come over from base PSO2. It also came up a lot when phase pushing would happen. If a boss was about to do a specific ability that had an animation or a sound or a sound effect that was going to go out, and you would interrupt it or push the phase, both sound effects would play at the same time at a much higher decibel, and it would be kind of crazy and be broken. So, I mean, I guess hot takes, if anything else, other than like, yeah, fixed mechanical issues, obviously. Sound is a big part of that. I don't really play with sound turned too high up or even used at all in a lot of cases. For me, there were a few things that I would have liked to see that changed. Primarily options for UI. There were a couple of things that were just missing out of the UI I thought really should be there. Things like block notifier, like where you were essentially. I was trying to figure out what block you're on. Basically, we had to do out of memory because there was nowhere on the actual UI that would tell you where it's at. That's something that's from base PSO2, so that definitely should be in. Able to mark up the map itself. I believe that you should be able to at least, make it easier to go to certain locations. Maybe not even save something, but at least be able to see it, tell where you're going to be going. That way you can actually move around a bit more. And I think the thing that really bugged me the most, I think this is just kind of a balancing thing, so I don't really want to hold it against them too much, was playing the beta really made me appreciate wanting to bring my base character over from PSO2. Like my time wasn't wasted because the early acquisition of materials, of resources, if you didn't have access to, like, I mean, granted, we had limited time, but if you didn't have, like, if you were someone who likes to grind like super hardcore, it was pretty brutal. I know for a fact I probably spent close to 500k, if not close to $1 million, on just grinding up a bunch of stuff and testing out a bunch of things that I wanted to try out and play. I know if someone's like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm going to start the game off base. That new player experience, while the experience of telling you where to go was great, things just seemed to be a bit, I don't want to say too expensive, but like the money acquisition just really wasn't there. And needing to go out and get resources was pretty brutal at times.
Yep, I agree. Two changes that I want is, first one is, as Krono said, marking the map. I want to be able to mark where mineral deposits are because, I need to plan out a route for that. And the second change I want is, could you please fix the controller support for PlayStation 4 controllers and not make me log out the game when I press circle 3 times in a row? That that bugged the crap out of me. I was like, wait a second, it kept logging me out.
Oh, I didn't mention it, but one thing I was going to say was just general keybind support. There are certain keys that just can't be rebound, and I feel like there definitely should be more opportunity to rebind certain things to other keys itself, or like, I know the entire bottom row of like 1 through 0, not everyone uses those keys specifically, so being able to rebind all of those would be super awesome.
All right, any final thoughts that you guys want to add in before we close this segment?
NGS is dope as hell, either with any complaints I have. Like, I think that my complaints are very small and minuscule as opposed to it's just a good game. I want more.
I'm kind of right there with you. As far as NGS goes, my complaints feel like nitpicks and small things. Overall, NGS feels like a really good start to what could be an almost absolutely amazing game. I mentioned this in another video that we did, but NGS for me was like a 7 out of 10, and most of that was just like, you're almost there. Like, there are a couple of things that need to be changed, and I'm like right there all the way 10 out of 10, and I'm really excited to see where it's going to go.
So I'm going to hand off the floor to Kaoiji first for any shout outs, and then we'll follow up with Krono. All right, Kaoiji, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I guess if we're shouting people out, Krono and keroppi are 2 really good guys. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them. They're pretty dope. And then I played a lot of like the New Genesis beta. We played a lot with Imakuni. We played a lot with Zing Cosma, or King Cosma as he prefers to be called. And then we played a lot with 100% Weeaboo too. There was just a lot of good people that we played with. I also have my own mod team who helps me translate certain things whenever I can't get it right, and that's Fear Parable and a couple others. And then there's a couple of artists who are helping me put things together for New Genesis, and it's just too many people to name on my end right now. So it's just thank you to everybody, realistically.
All right, perfect. You'll be able to find all of Kaoiji's socials in the description below. All right. Krono?
Well, we'll skip over all of my social stuff because you will be able to find it in the description. However, as far as shout outs go, a lot of I kind of want to do what Mark did. You should definitely check out Kaoiji and, of course, keroppi. Both amazing individuals in the community itself. But yeah, we played a lot with Kaz. We played a lot with Kuni. A lot of people I actually hadn't played with. One thing I did mention was kind of cool about NGS was one thing I don't really do very often is sit in Discord and hang out with a bunch of people while I play the game itself. Usually we're all kind of doing our own thing, whether it be with our chats or with streaming or anything like that. And one thing that happened a lot was hanging out in chat, talking with people for 10, 15 plus hours. We were streaming the game for so crazy long. But shout outs to, of course, 100% Weeb, my mod Annabelle, of course. They're my artist and editor. They are two great individuals itself. Annabelle unfortunately didn't get a chance to get the beta. Hopefully he will get a chance to get the next one. But we did play with a lot of us, had a good time. And anyone else that we played with, honestly, I can't remember everyone's names. I'm so sorry. But anyone else that hang out with all of us, Mark's chat was super chill. And everyone else that we played alongside. A lot of, like he said, there's too much to name. There were people who were helping me with translations on the fly, figuring things out because sometimes my translation just didn't work while I was using. I'm not sure if it was just me, but like you guys use translations on your phone and things like that too. Half times those didn't work. People were figuring things out for me too.
Mine wasn't working, so that's why I had to use whatever knowledge I had. I was like,
Exactly. So shout outs to basically the entire community. Like that was something that I'd never been really a part of or figured would be a big thing, but it was a lot of fun.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, man. Again.
Yeah.
And that wraps up episode 11 of Arks Trash. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe. And I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye.
What can I say except you're welcome for the heals, the boosts, the rest.